The world had shrunk to the slick, groaning planks of the pier and the shriek of a wind that tasted of salt and panic. For months, my life had been a study in quiet desperation, a series of routines designed to keep my head just above water. I worked the docks, hauling lines for fishermen who smelled of diesel and disinterest, patching sails for weekend sailors with more money than sense, and generally making myself useful enough that Sal, my boss, kept signing my meager paychecks. It wasn't a life. It was an existence, measured in tides and the slow ache in my lower back. My one indulgence, my single point of beauty in a landscape of rust and splintered wood, was a yacht named the Serenity. She was a classic vessel, all polished teak and gleaming brass, with lines so graceful she seemed to be carved from moonlight. She belonged to Arthur Sterling, a man who was more myth than reality around the marina. He was older, wealthy beyond the local definition of the word, and kept to himself. I'd see him sometimes on the deck, his hair the color of sea salt, his posture straight and steady, a quiet anchor in a world of constant motion. He never spoke to me, but sometimes his gaze would drift over, and I would feel a strange, disquieting weight to it, as if he were measuring something I couldn't see. I had a small, folded piece of paper in my wallet, a classified ad from a year ago for a junior archivist position at the local university. I'd been qualified. I'd even had the interview. But life, as it often did, had intervened. A family emergency had drained my savings, and the steady, if soul-crushing, work on the docks had become a necessity, not a choice. The ad was a reminder of a different path, a person I might have been. A person who didn't live in a cramped room above a bait shop, smelling of brine and regret. That afternoon, the sky had turned the color of a bruise without warning. The weather report had promised calm seas, a lie that the wind now screamed back at the heavens. Sal had been yelling about a shipment of canvas that needed to be secured before the squall hit proper. He'd pointed a thick finger at me. "Leo, get it done. Don't want that stuff blowing out to sea." Then he'd retreated to the warmth of his office, leaving me to wrestle with tarps that whipped like angry sails. The rain came down not in drops, but in solid, wind-driven sheets. It plastered my thin jacket to my skin, the cold seeping straight into my bones. The pier swayed beneath my feet, the wood groaning in protest as waves, black and furious, slammed against the pilings. I lost my footing, my worn boots sliding on the wet planks, and went down hard on one knee. A sharp, searing pain shot up my leg. I tasted blood in my mouth where I'd bitten my tongue. This is it, I thought, with a strange sense of calm. This is the stupid, pointless way it ends. Then, a light cut through the deluge. It was a powerful beam, warm and golden against the gray chaos. It came from the Serenity, which was bucking at its moorings not 50 feet away. A figure stood on the deck, silhouetted against the cabin light. It was him, Arthur Sterling. He was shouting something, but the wind tore the words away. He pointed not at me, but at the gangplank, which was still, miraculously, connected to the pier. He was gesturing for me to come aboard. For a moment, I just stared. It felt like a hallucination, a fever dream brought on by the cold and the pain. But he gestured again, more urgently this time. Getting to my feet was an agony. My knee screamed, and the world tilted precariously. I limped, half-crawled, toward the gangplank, my hands raw from gripping the splintered railing. Each step was a battle against the wind that tried to tear me from my feet and hurl me into the churning water below. I finally reached the yacht. A hand, strong and steady, gripped my arm, pulling me the last few feet onto the solid deck. The shift from the swaying pier to the rhythmic roll of the yacht was dizzying. I stumbled, and a solid body braced me. I was pressed against a chest that was broad and warm, even through the layers of his foul-weather gear. The storm raged around us, a symphony of chaos, but in this small circle of contact, there was an impossible stillness. He leaned in close, his voice a low rumble against my ear, cutting through the gale. "Hold on," he said. The words were a command, a simple instruction for survival. I gripped the railing, my knuckles white. He must have felt the tremor in my body, the sheer animal terror mixed with the shock of it all. His hand moved from my arm to my back, a solid, reassuring pressure. Then he spoke again, his voice softer, deeper, changing the entire meaning of the world. "Hold on to me," and I did. I sagged against him, my face pressed into the rough, waterproof fabric of his jacket. It smelled of the sea, of clean air, and something else, something uniquely him, a faint, warm scent of cedar and quiet confidence. He held me there for a long moment, a human breakwater against the storm, his arm a solid bar across my back, keeping me upright, keeping me safe. The roaring of the wind seemed to recede, replaced by the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart against my ear. It was the calmest I had felt in years. He guided me into the main cabin, his hand never leaving my back. The transition was jarring. One moment, I was in the heart of a tempest. The next, I was in a space of profound peace. The cabin was bathed in the soft glow of brass lamps. Rich, dark wood gleamed, and the air was warm and dry. There were bookshelves built into the walls, filled with old, leather-bound volumes. A low table held a chart, a pair of reading glasses resting beside it. It was a space that spoke of order, of quiet contemplation, of a life lived with intention. My life, by contrast, felt like a scattered collection of broken pieces. "Sit down," he said, his voice returning to that calm, authoritative tone. He pointed to a deep leather armchair that looked like it had been worn to perfect softness over decades. I obeyed without thinking, sinking into the cushion. My body immediately began to shake, the adrenaline and the cold hitting me all at once. My teeth chattered violently. He disappeared for a moment and returned with a thick cashmere blanket, the color of cream. He draped it over my shoulders without a word. The weight of it was as comforting as the warmth. He knelt in front of me, his eyes, a startlingly clear gray, scanning my face, then moving down to my leg. My jeans were torn at the knee, and blood was beginning to seep through the dark, wet denim. "You're hurt," he stated. It wasn't a question. "It's nothing," I mumbled, my voice hoarse. "Just a scrape." The lie was flimsy, pathetic, but it was all I had. Admitting the depth of my own foolishness, my own vulnerability, felt impossible in this space, in front of this man. He didn't argue. He simply rose and went to a small, polished cabinet. He came back with a first aid kit. It wasn't the cheap plastic kind I had in my bathroom. It was a handsome wooden box with brass clasps. He opened it, and the contents were as neatly arranged as everything else in the cabin. He placed it on the floor and looked at me, a question in his eyes. "May I?" The simple courtesy of it threw me. Saul would have just barked an order. The fisherman would have laughed. But Arthur Sterling, a man who could probably buy the entire marina without noticing the expense, was asking my permission to look at my injured knee. I swallowed, the sound loud in the quiet cabin, and nodded. His hands were careful as he gently worked the torn fabric of my jeans away from the wound. His fingers were long and surprisingly warm against my cold skin. I flinched as the denim pulled at the raw flesh. "Sorry," he murmured, his touch becoming even lighter. He cleaned the gash with an antiseptic wipe. The sting was sharp, and I hissed, but his presence was so calming that the pain seemed distant. He worked with a quiet competence, his focus entirely on the task. I found myself watching his hands. They were strong, capable, with a few faint scars across the knuckles, the hands of a man who worked, who did things, despite his wealth. While he worked, I took in the details of his face up close for the first time. The lines around his eyes were etched deep, not from worry, but from years of squinting into the sun, and, I thought, from smiling. His jaw was firm, his mouth a straight, serious line, but it didn't seem unkind. He was older than I'd thought from a distance, maybe in his late 50s, but he carried his age with a kind of settled grace. He was a man who was comfortable in his own skin, who had built his own world and now inhabited it with a quiet, unshakable confidence. He finished bandaging my knee, the white gauze a stark contrast to my grimy, torn jeans. "That should hold for now," he said, sitting back on his heels. His gaze met mine, and for the first time, I felt like he was truly seeing me, not just the drenched, half-drowned dockhand, but the person underneath. "I'm Arthur, by the way, Leo," I managed to say. "I thank you. You didn't have to do that. You saved me." The words felt inadequate, small and thin in the face of what he had done. A small smile touched his lips, softening the stern lines of his face. "The sea is generous, but she can also be cruel. We look out for each other on the water. Or we should." He stood up, collecting the first aid supplies. "You need to get out of those wet clothes. There's a guest cabin with a shower. I'll find you something dry to wear. He led me down a short, narrow corridor to a small but immaculately kept cabin. The bed was made up with crisp, navy blue linens. He opened a closet and pulled out a soft gray sweatshirt and a pair of dark sweatpants. They were simple, unadorned, but the fabric felt impossibly soft. These should be comfortable enough, he said, laying them on the bed. The head is through there. Take your time. The storm isn't going anywhere for a while. He left, closing the door softly behind him, and I was alone. I stood there for a long moment, the soft blanket still around my shoulders, the borrowed clothes on the bed. The silence of the boat was a low, humming thing, punctuated by the creak of wood and the muffled sound of the storm raging outside. It felt like a different universe from the pier. In here, there was warmth and safety and the quiet hum of a well-oiled machine. Out there was the chaos I called my life. The shower was hot, and I stood under the spray for a long time, letting the water wash away the cold and the fear. I watched the blood and grime swirl down the drain, as if I could wash away the last year along with it. When I stepped out, I dried myself with a towel that was thick and plush, a small, everyday luxury that felt more decadent than anything I could imagine. The clothes he'd given me were loose, but incredibly warm and soft against my clean skin. The sweatshirt smelled faintly of him, that same clean, cedar scent. Wearing his clothes felt intimate, presumptuous. I felt like an imposter, a stray brought in from the rain, playing dress-up in a world I didn't belong to. I looked at my reflection in the small mirror. The dark circles under my eyes were still there. The tension in my jaw hadn't completely disappeared, but some of the hunted look had gone. When I returned to the main cabin, he was standing by the galley, a small, efficient kitchen area, pouring steaming water into 2 mugs. He looked up as I entered, and his eyes seemed to soften. "Better?" he asked. I nodded, suddenly shy. "Much better. Thank you." I gestured to the clothes. "For these, too, don't mention it." He handed me one of the mugs. It was hot, and the steam that rose from it smelled of ginger and lemon. "Tea. It'll help with the chill." I took a sip. The warmth spread through my chest, a welcome, comforting heat. We stood in silence for a moment. The only sounds the hum of the boat's generator and the drumming of the rain against the deck above. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a comfortable, settled quiet. He leaned against the counter, cradling his own mug, and watched the sheets of water running down the thick glass of the cabin windows. "It's a bad one," he said, more to himself than to me. "Came up fast, they always do," I replied, the words coming out before I could think. It was an old sailor's wisdom, something I'd heard 100 times on the docks. He turned his head to look at me, a flicker of surprise in his gray eyes. "You know the water, I work on it," I said, a faint bitterness creeping into my voice. "Or next to it, anyway." "For Sal at the marina office." He nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "I've seen you," he said. The simple statement sent a jolt through me. He had noticed me. I wasn't just part of the background, another faceless worker. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. What had he seen? A young man going nowhere, patching other people's sails, dreaming of other people's boats? "You're diligent," he continued, his voice even. "You coil a line properly. Not many people do anymore. They rush. They don't respect the process." It was such a small, specific thing to notice. A detail that no one, not even Sal, had ever commented on. I had always taken pride in it, in doing the small things right, as if precision in my work could somehow bring order to the chaos of my life. To have it seen, to have it named by this man, made my cheeks grow warm. "My father taught me," I said quietly. "He was a fisherman. He always said a messy line is a sign of a messy mind." A real smile touched Arthur's lips this time. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. "Your father was a wise man." He gestured toward the armchairs. "Please sit. There's no sense in standing around." We sat, the low table between us. The storm provided a constant, muffled percussion. I felt a strange sense of dislocation, as if I had stepped through a door into a different life. An hour ago, I was risking my life for a few $100s worth of canvas. Now I was sitting in a warm, dry cabin, drinking herbal tea with a man who probably considered a few $100s to be pocket change. The gulf between our worlds felt immense, unbridgeable. And yet, he didn't make me feel small. He spoke to me as an equal. He asked about my work, not in a condescending way, but with genuine curiosity. He asked about the different boats in the marina, about the currents in the bay. He listened, truly listened, to my answers, his gray eyes focused on me, his head tilted slightly. I found myself talking more than I had in months, the words tumbling out, clumsy and unpracticed. I told him about the challenges of patching old Dacron sails, about the satisfaction of getting a finish just right. I didn't tell him about the loneliness or the constant, grinding worry about money, but I felt as if he could see it anyway, in the worn cuffs of my own jeans, now in a wet pile in the guest cabin, or in the way I held the warm mug like a lifeline. He spoke very little about himself. His words were measured, chosen with care. I learned that he had built this boat himself, years ago, with a partner who had since passed away. He spoke of the process with a quiet reverence, the way a person might speak of raising a child. The serenity wasn't just a possession to him. It was a part of him, a vessel for his memories and his solitude. As he spoke, he gestured with his hands, and I watched them again. When he handed me the mug of tea earlier, his fingers had brushed against mine. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental contact. But my skin still tingled where he had touched it. It was a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea, a small spark in the cold, damp landscape of my life. Now, as he described the process of shaping the hull, his hands moved in the air, carving invisible lines, and I felt an absurd urge to reach out and trace the lines on his skin. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, tucking my feet up underneath me in the large chair. The action was unconsciously domestic, something I might do in my own space, if my own space felt safe. I realized it too late, feeling a flush of embarrassment. But Arthur didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't comment. His gaze was fixed on the rain-streaked window. "It looks like it's settling in for the night," he said, his voice a low murmur. "The harbor master's report says the winds won't die down until morning." The implication hung in the air between us. I couldn't go back. I was stranded here, a guest in this strange, quiet sanctuary. The thought should have made me anxious, but instead, a wave of profound, inexplicable relief washed over me. For one night, I didn't have to go back to my cold, empty room. For one night, I was safe. "You're welcome to stay in the guest cabin," he said, as if reading my mind. He turned from the window, his eyes meeting mine. "It's no trouble, I couldn't," I started, the protest automatic, born of a lifetime of not wanting to be a burden. "I don't have anything, you have my sweatshirt," he said, a hint of gentle teasing in his voice. "Consider it rent." He stood up. "Are you hungry?" I was about to make some soup. I was starving. I hadn't eaten since a stale granola bar that morning. But accepting food, on top of shelter and clothing and first aid, felt like too much. It felt like charity, and my pride, already battered and bruised, recoiled from the word. He must have seen the conflict on my face. His expression softened. "Leo," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's just soup. Let me feed you." It's the most basic kindness on the sea. He didn't wait for an answer, just turned to the galley and began to move with that same quiet efficiency. He pulled out a pot, a cutting board, an onion, some carrots. I watched him, my protest dying on my lips. There was no artifice in his offer, no hidden expectation. It was, as he said, a simple kindness. And I was too tired, too cold, too hungry to refuse it. I got up and walked over to the galley, my bare feet silent on the polished wood floor. "Can I help?" I asked. He looked up from chopping the onion, his eyes watering slightly. He blinked a few times and then smiled. "You can handle the garlic, if you're willing." He passed me the cutting board and a small knife. And just like that, we were working side by side in the small, warm galley. The space was compact, and our shoulders brushed as we moved. Each time, a jolt went through me, a quiet current of electricity. I focused on the task, on mincing the garlic into tiny, perfect squares, the familiar, rhythmic work of comfort. The air filled with the savory scent of sautéing vegetables. It smelled like home, or what I imagined home was supposed to smell like. We didn't talk much as we cooked. We didn't need to. There was a comfortable rhythm to our movements, a shared purpose. He seasoned the soup, tasting it with a small spoon, his brow furrowed in concentration. He added a pinch of thyme, then a bay leaf. He moved like a man who had done this 1,000 times, who found a meditative peace in the simple act of creation. When the soup was ready, we ate at the small table in the cabin. It was a simple vegetable soup, but it was the best thing I had ever tasted. It was hot and hearty and chased the last of the chill from my bones. We ate in a companionable silence, the storm a distant roar outside the warm, lamplit circle of our meal. After we finished, I insisted on helping with the dishes. He tried to refuse, but I was firm. "It's the least I can do," I said. So we stood side by side again at the small sink, me washing, him drying. His hand brushed mine as he took a bowl from me, and this time, the contact lingered for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. My breath hitched. I kept my eyes fixed on the soapy water, my heart hammering against my ribs. Was I imagining it? Was I so starved for human connection that I was inventing meaning in every accidental touch? When we were done, he poured us both a small glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "Brandy," he said, handing me a glass. To warm the soul, I took a sip. The liquid was fiery and smooth, sliding down my throat and leaving a trail of warmth. We sat again in the comfortable armchairs. The brandy, combined with the food and the heat of the cabin, made me feel heavy and relaxed. My guard, which I had held up for so long, was beginning to crumble. "Tell me about the books," I said, gesturing to the shelves that lined the walls. It was a safe topic, a way to steer the conversation away from the unsettling current that flowed between us. His face lit up. He spoke about his collection, about first editions of maritime histories, about volumes of poetry inspired by the sea. He spoke with the passion of a true scholar. It was clear that these books were not just for decoration. They were his companions. "I've been meaning to catalog them properly for years," he said with a sigh. "But I never seem to find the time. The system I have is chaotic." He smiled a self-deprecating smile. Much like the mind of their owner, the folded, worn-out classified ad in my wallet felt like it was burning a hole through my jeans, which were now drying in the engine room. An archivist. The job I'd wanted, the life I'd lost. The words came out of me before I could stop them. "I was studying archival sciences." He stopped, his glass halfway to his lips. He looked at me, his gray eyes sharp and assessing. "You were?" I nodded, feeling my face flush. "At the university. I had to stop. For a while. I didn't want to go into the messy details of my family's collapse, of the money that had vanished, of the responsibilities that had fallen on my shoulders. Now I patched sales." He was silent for a long moment, just watching me. I couldn't read his expression. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, more thoughtful. "Nothing wrong with patching sales," he said finally, his voice quiet. "It's honorable work. It keeps people safe." His validation was a balm on a wound I hadn't realized was so raw. He didn't look down on me. He saw the value in the work I did, even if I couldn't always see it myself. "But it's not what you wanted to be doing," he added. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. I couldn't meet his gaze. I looked down into my glass, at the swirling amber liquid. "No," I whispered. "It's not." A wave of vulnerability washed over me, so strong it was dizzying. I had just admitted a profound failure to a near stranger, a man who seemed to embody success, stability, and purpose. I felt exposed, stripped bare. I expected him to say something platitudinous, something like, "It's never too late," but he didn't. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice low and serious. "Leo," he said, and the way he said my name made me look up. "Sometimes the storm isn't outside. Sometimes it's the thing we have to navigate to get to the shore we're meant to be on." His words struck me with the force of a physical blow. He saw it. He saw the storm inside me, the chaos and the fear that I worked so hard to hide. And he wasn't afraid of it. He wasn't judging it. He was just naming it. I didn't know what to say. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of the rain and the creak of the boat. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to confess everything, to pour out the whole sorry story of my life. But I held back. The habit of self-preservation was too strong. He seemed to understand. He leaned back in his chair, breaking the intensity of the moment. "It's getting late," he said, his voice returning to its normal, calm cadence. "You should get some rest. The guest cabin is all yours." I nodded, grateful for the reprieve. I stood up, the blanket still clutched around me. "Arthur," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "Thank you for everything. Get some sleep, Leo," he said softly. His eyes held mine for a moment longer, and in their depths, I saw a flicker of something that looked like loneliness. A deep, profound loneliness that mirrored my own. And in that instant, the vast gulf between our worlds seemed to shrink, just a little. The bed in the guest cabin was more comfortable than any I had ever slept in. The sheets were cool and crisp, the blanket heavy and warm. The gentle rocking of the boat was a soothing lullaby. But I lay awake for a long time, my mind racing. I replayed every moment of the evening, every word, every glance, every accidental touch. I thought about his hands, so sure and gentle as they bandaged my knee. I thought about his voice, a low, steady anchor in the storm. And I thought about his eyes, which seemed to see right through the walls I had built around myself. I was adrift, and he had offered me a harbor. But harbors were temporary. The storm would pass. The morning would come. And I would have to go back to my life, to the cold reality of the docks. The thought filled me with a hollow ache. For the first time in a very long time, I had felt safe. I had felt seen. And I didn't want to let that feeling go. I fell asleep with the scent of cedar from his sweatshirt filling my senses, and for the first time in years, I didn't dream of drowning. I woke to a strange and unfamiliar silence. The drumming of the rain had stopped. The howling of the wind had died down to a low whisper. A pale, watery light filtered through the small porthole in the cabin. The storm had passed. A sense of dread settled in my stomach. It was over. The magical, suspended reality of the night was gone, and the real world was waiting. I had to leave. I had to thank him and walk off this beautiful, safe boat and back into my life of quiet desperation. I dressed in my own clothes, which I found neatly folded on a chair outside my door. They were dry and surprisingly warm, smelling faintly of the boat's engine room. They felt like a costume, the uniform of a life I was reluctant to reclaim. My torn jeans and frayed shirt felt cheap and shoddy after the softness of his clothes. I found him in the main cabin, standing by the window with a mug in his hand, looking out at the marina. The sky was a clean-swept canvas of pale gray and soft pink. The water was calm, the surface like hammered silver. It was as if the fury of the night had never happened. He turned as I approached, and a small smile touched his lips. "Good morning," he said. His voice was warm, but there was a new distance in it, a polite formality that hadn't been there the night before. Or maybe I was just imagining it, bracing myself for the inevitable end of our brief connection. "Morning," I said, my own voice tight. "It looks calm. The world always does, after a good cleansing," he replied, his gaze returning to the window. "Coffee?" I accepted, and he poured me a mug. We stood there, side by side, looking out at the awakening marina. The silence felt different this morning. It was heavier, freighted with unspoken things. Last night, we were two people weathering a storm together. This morning, we were a wealthy yacht owner and the dockhand he had rescued. The chasm between us had opened up again. I knew I had to say something, to make my exit. "Well," I began, the word feeling clumsy and loud in the quiet cabin. I should get going. Sal will be wondering where I am. Probably thinks I got washed out to sea." I tried for a light tone, but it fell flat. Arthur turned to face me fully. He studied my face for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Before you go," he said slowly, "I have a proposition for you." My heart gave a nervous thud. "A proposition?" "It's not what you think," he said quickly, a faint flush rising on his cheeks. The sight of it, this small crack in his composed exterior, was strangely endearing. "It's about the books. My library." He gestured to the shelves. "You mentioned you studied archival sciences. I need someone to catalog them properly, to create a system, input them into a database. It's a real job, Leo, one that requires a specific skill set." "Your skill set?" I stared at him, stunned into silence. "A job." He was offering me a job. A job doing what I had dreamed of doing, in this beautiful, peaceful space. It was everything I wanted, and that's what made it terrifying. I don't know what to say," I stammered. "Say you'll consider it," he said, his voice earnest. "I would pay you a fair wage. Well above what Sal is paying you, I imagine. We would draw up a contract. It would be a short-term project, perhaps a few months. Clear terms, clear expectations. No strings attached." He emphasized the last words, his gaze steady and direct. He was trying to reassure me, to strip away the power imbalance that was so glaringly obvious between us. He was making it a business transaction, clean and professional. But it wasn't clean. It couldn't be. Not after last night. Not after the way he had looked at me, the way his hand had felt on my back. Working for him, Being in his presence every day would be a special kind of torture. It would be a constant reminder of what I couldn't have, of the world he inhabited and the one I was locked out of. I can't, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I appreciate it, Arthur. More than you know. But I can't. A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, so quick I almost missed it. May I ask why? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. It wouldn't be right, I said, fumbling for an explanation that wasn't the raw, honest truth. It would feel like charity. Because of last night, he set his mug down on the counter with a soft click. He took a step closer to me, and the space between us crackled with a sudden tension. Last night, he said, his voice low and intense, I saw a capable young man in a dangerous situation. I offered him shelter. Today, I am a man with a project who has discovered that this same young man has the precise qualifications to complete it. The two things are separate, are they? I challenged, my own voice barely a whisper. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I was terrified, but some small, defiant part of me needed to push, needed to know. He held my gaze, his own gray eyes searching mine. No, he admitted, his voice dropping even lower. They're not. But that doesn't change the legitimacy of the offer. The job is real. The need is real. And my desire to have you here, in this space, is also real. The admission hung in the air, a breathtaking, terrifying confession. He wanted me here. It wasn't just about the books. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and hope. Fear of the power he held, of the inevitable heartbreak of getting involved with someone so far out of my league. But hope, a fragile, persistent hope, that this connection I felt wasn't just in my head, that it was real and mutual. The contract would be with a management company that handles my affairs, he continued, pulling back slightly, giving me space, making it professional again. You would submit your hours to them. I would simply be the client. We can keep it as formal as you need it to be. The boundaries will be yours to set. He was giving me all the power. He was handing me the reins, letting me decide the terms of our interaction. It was a gesture of profound respect. He wasn't trying to buy me or own me. He was trying to create a space where we could exist together on terms that felt safe for me. I looked around the cabin, at the warm wood, the shelves of books, the light pouring in through the windows. It felt like a lifeline. It was a chance to do work I loved, to earn a decent wage, to pull myself out of the hole I had fallen into. And it was a chance to be near him. The risk was enormous. But the thought of walking away, of going back to my old life and never seeing him again, that risk was even greater. I am taking a breath. A real one. It feels like the first one I've taken in a year. Okay. I say, the word small but solid. Okay. I'll do it. Relief washed over his face, so profound it was like watching the sun break through the clouds. The smile he gave me then was not the small, polite smile of before. It was wide and genuine, and it transformed his entire face, erasing years of solitude and reserve. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The first few days were a study in careful navigation. I gave Sal my notice, a conversation that was as brief and unpleasant as I had expected. He grumbled about my lack of loyalty, but his eyes held a greedy, speculative glint as he looked past me toward the Serenity. The marina gossip would be starting, I knew. I tried not to care. Arthur was true to his word. The next day, I met with a woman from his management company, a brisk, professional person named Eleanor who had me sign a contract and fill out paperwork. The hourly wage she quoted made my head spin. It was more than 3 times what Sal had been paying me. I signed the documents, my hand shaking slightly. It was real. My first day of work felt like the first day of school. I arrived at the yacht with a new notebook and a set of sharpened pencils, feeling both nervous and ridiculously excited. Arthur greeted me at the gangplank, dressed in simple khaki trousers and a navy polo shirt. He was all business, showing me the small desk he had set up for me in a corner of the cabin, the laptop he had purchased for the project, the software he wanted me to use. I'll be in and out, he explained, keeping a polite distance. I have work of my own to attend to. Please, make yourself at home. The galley is at your disposal. If you need anything, just ask. And then he retreated to a small navigation station at the front of the cabin, leaving me to my work. The space between us felt charged, a palpable field of awareness. I tried to focus on the books, on the task at hand. I took the first volume off the shelf. It was a heavy, leather-bound history of early cartography, its pages filled with beautiful, hand-drawn maps. I lost myself in the work, in the scent of old paper and leather, in the quiet satisfaction of creating order out of chaos. We fell into a routine. I would arrive each morning at 9. He would already be there, with coffee brewed. We would exchange quiet greetings. I would work for hours, meticulously recording each book's title, author, publication date, and condition. He would work at his own desk, sometimes taking calls, his voice a low, authoritative murmur, sometimes just sitting and reading or staring out at the water. We rarely spoke during the day, but I was aware of him always. I was aware of the way the light caught the silver in his hair. I was aware of the faint sound of his breathing in the quiet cabin. I was aware of the scent of his coffee, a rich, dark aroma that now, in my mind, was inextricably linked to him. I watched him, pretending to be absorbed in my work. I learned the small things about him. I learned that he rubbed the back of his neck when he was deep in thought. I learned that he had a faint scar above his left eyebrow. I learned that he hummed, a low, tuneless sound, when he was working on a particularly complex chart. These small, intimate details felt like stolen treasures. Lunch became our ritual. Around noon, he would rise from his desk. "Leo," he would say, "time for a break." He would make us sandwiches, simple but delicious, with fresh bread and good cheese. We would eat them at the small table, and for that half hour, the professional boundary would soften. He would ask me about the books I had cataloged that morning. He would tell me stories about where he had acquired a particular volume, a dusty bookshop in Lisbon, a flea market in Marseille. His stories were filled with a quiet nostalgia, a yearning for a past that seemed both adventurous and lonely. During these lunches, I started to see the man behind the myth. He was witty, with a dry sense of humor that took me by surprise. He was incredibly well-read, able to talk about everything from naval history to modern poetry. But there was also a vulnerability to him, a flicker of sadness in his eyes when he spoke of his late partner, the man he had built this boat with. He never said his name, just referred to him as my David. I found myself opening up in return, in small, careful increments. I told him about my parents, about my love for history. I told him about the professor at the university who had encouraged me, who had told me I had a gift for research. I spoke of my past with a frankness that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. He was an excellent listener, his attention a warm, focused beam that made me feel like the most interesting person in the world. One afternoon, I was struggling to reach a book on the highest shelf. I was stretching, my fingers just brushing the spine, when I felt a warmth at my back. I froze. Arthur was standing directly behind me, his body close but not quite touching mine. "Allow me," he said, his voice a low rumble near my ear. He reached up, his arm brushing against my shoulder. The contact was brief, a fleeting warmth through the fabric of my shirt, but it sent a shockwave through my entire body. He easily retrieved the book and handed it to me. Our fingers touched as I took it. His skin was warm and dry. I looked up at him, and his gray eyes were dark, his expression intense. The air between us was thick, heavy with unspoken words. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. He held my gaze for a beat too long, and then he stepped back, breaking the spell. "There you are," he said, his voice a little strained. He cleared his throat and returned to his desk without another word. I stood there for a long moment, the heavy book in my hands, my body tingling. It wasn't my imagination. He felt it too. This current that flowed between us, this invisible thread that connected us across the quiet cabin. The knowledge was both exhilarating and terrifying. It changed everything. The careful, professional boundary we had constructed felt suddenly fragile, like glass. From that day on, the tension was a constant companion. The accidental brushes of our hands seemed to happen more frequently. The silences seemed to be filled with more meaning. I would catch him looking at me, his gaze lingering, and he would quickly look away, a faint flush on his cheeks. The work was my salvation. It was my anchor in this sea of unspoken emotion. I poured all my energy into it, creating a detailed, cross-referenced catalog that was a thing of beauty and order. I was good at it. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of pride in my own abilities. I was not just a charity case. I was a professional, providing a valuable service. The thought gave me a sliver of confidence. One evening, I stayed late to finish a particularly complex section of the catalog. The sun was setting, painting the cabin in hues of orange and gold. Arthur was on the deck, talking on the phone. I watched him through the window, his silhouette dark against the fiery sky. He looked powerful and solitary, a king in his floating kingdom. When he came back inside, he seemed tired. The lines around his eyes were deeper than usual. He saw me still at my desk, and a small, weary smile touched his lips. "Still at it?" he asked. "You're a harder worker than I am." "I wanted to finish this section," I said, my voice soft. He walked over and looked at my screen, at the neat columns and meticulous entries. "This is remarkable, Leo," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "It's more than I ever could have hoped for. I'm glad you like it," I said, my cheeks warm from his praise. He didn't move away. He stood beside my chair, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He rested a hand on the back of my chair, his fingers just inches from my shoulder. My entire body went rigid with anticipation. "Stay," he said, his voice a low plea. "Stay for dinner." It wasn't a casual invitation like the soup on the night of the storm. This was different. This was a request, a deliberate step across the professional line we had drawn. My mind screamed at me to say no, to pack up my things and run, to protect myself from the inevitable pain. But my heart, my foolish, yearning heart, had other ideas. I turned in my chair to look up at him. His face was etched with a raw vulnerability that took my breath away. The powerful, self-assured man was gone, replaced by someone who looked uncertain and hopeful and a little bit afraid. He looked the way I felt. "I'd like that," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The relief on his face was my undoing. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. His hand, which had been resting on my chair, moved. His fingers gently, tentatively, brushed against my shoulder. It wasn't an accident. It was a question. I didn't pull away. I leaned into the touch, just a fraction of an inch. It was all the answer he needed. His hand settled on my shoulder, his thumb stroking the tense muscle there. The simple, gentle touch was more intimate than any kiss I had ever known. It was a touch that said, "I see you. I'm here. It's okay." In that moment, the silence in the cabin was no longer filled with tension, but with a profound and trembling sense of arrival. The storm had passed, and I was finally home. That dinner changed the current between us. We didn't speak of the moment his hand had rested on my shoulder, but it was a silent, shared acknowledgement. The pretense of a purely professional relationship had dissolved, leaving something more fragile and infinitely more real in its place. He started to invite me to stay for dinner more often, and I always said yes. We would cook together, our movements in the small galley becoming a familiar, comfortable dance. Our conversations deepened, straying from the safe harbors of books and the sea into the more treacherous waters of our own lives. He told me about David, about their life together. He spoke of a love that was quiet and deep, built over decades of shared dreams and quiet companionship. He spoke of the silence that had descended after David's death, a silence so profound he thought it might swallow him whole. Buying the serenity, their shared dream, and sailing it alone had been his way of keeping a promise, of holding onto a memory. But the solitude, he admitted, had become a heavy weight. His vulnerability was a gift, and I treasured it. It made me feel safe enough to share my own fears, my own deep-seated loneliness. I told him about the crushing weight of my family's expectations before they had imploded, and the strange, hollow freedom that had come after. I confessed my fear that I was adrift, that I had no anchor, no direction. "You have a direction," he said one evening, his voice firm as he looked at me across the small dinner table. "You're steering yourself toward a shore you just can't see yet. You're a cartographer, Leo. You're just drawing your own map." His belief in me was a steadying force. It made me stand a little straighter, speak a little more confidently. The work on the books was nearing completion, and with it came a looming sense of dread. The contract was for the project. When the project was done, our arrangement would be over. The thought of not coming to this boat every day, of not seeing him, was a physical ache in my chest. The tipping point came unexpectedly. We had to go into town to pick up some specialized archival supplies I had ordered. Walking through the marina with him felt different. We were no longer hidden away in the sanctuary of his boat. We were in public. I was intensely aware of the stares we were getting. I saw Sal watching us from his office window, a smirk on his face. I saw a couple of the fishermen nudge each other and snicker. The gossip I had been dreading was now a tangible thing. The looks, the whispers, they were all about the rich old man and the young dockhand he'd taken under his wing. A hot, shameful flush crept up my neck. I instinctively put a little distance between us as we walked. Arthur noticed immediately. The warm, easy expression on his face faded, replaced by a look of concern. He slowed his pace to match mine. "Leo," he asked, his voice low, "are you all right?" "I'm fine," I lied, my eyes fixed on the pavement in front of me. He stopped walking. He put a hand on my arm, gently but firmly, forcing me to stop and look at him. "Don't," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "Don't let them do this. Don't let their small minds diminish what this is, and what is this?" I asked, the words sharper than I intended, born of my own fear and shame. "I work for you, Arthur. That's what this is. And they all think—" I couldn't finish the sentence. His hand tightened on my arm. His gray eyes were fierce. "I don't give a damn what they think," he said, his voice a low growl. "I care what you think. Is that what you think this is? That I'm just your employer?" The world seemed to fall away. There was only his face, his intense gaze, his hand on my arm. The question hung between us, demanding an answer. The careful walls I had built, the safe distance I had tried to maintain, it all crumbled to dust. "No," I whispered, the truth finally breaking free. "It's not what I think. It's what I'm afraid of." His expression softened. The fierceness in his eyes was replaced by a look of profound tenderness. "There is nothing to be afraid of," he said, his voice gentle. "Not with me." He let go of my arm, but the warmth of his touch lingered. We stood there for a long moment in the middle of the busy marina, locked in our own private world. He had seen my fear, and he hadn't backed away. He had stood his ground, had stood my ground. He had protected me, not by fighting, but by simply refusing to let the ugliness of the world touch us. We finished our errand in a charged silence. When we got back to the boat, the sanctuary felt more necessary than ever. I went to my desk, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept replaying the scene at the marina, his words echoing in my ears. "I care what you think." The sun began to set, and I knew I should leave. But I was rooted to the spot. I couldn't go. Not yet. Not until this unbearable tension between us was resolved. Arthur came and stood before my desk. He didn't say anything, just looked at me, his face serious. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the next words spoken would change everything. I had to be the one to speak them. I had to be brave. I stood up, so we were face to face. My heart was a frantic bird in my chest. "The project is almost finished," I said, my voice shaking slightly. He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. "I know, I don't know how to do this," I confessed, my voice cracking. "I don't know how to finish the job, and say thank you, and just walk away. And I don't know how to stay without." I trailed off, unable to voice the hope that was both a terror and a prayer. He closed the small distance between us. He was so close now I could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. He smelled of sea air and that faint, warm scent of cedar that was so uniquely him. "Without what, Leo?" he prompted, his voice a soft murmur. He was making me say it. He was making me claim it, so there could be no doubt, no misunderstanding. He was giving me the power to name what was happening between us. I took a shaky breath. "Without this feeling," I whispered, the admission costing me everything. "This feeling that I'm falling for you." A shuddered, vulnerable look crossed his face. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air for a moment before he gently cupped my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, a touch so tender it made my knees feel weak. "Oh, Leo," he breathed, a world of emotion in those two words. I think I've been falling for you since the moment I pulled you out of the storm." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "I've been waiting," he said, his voice thick. "Waiting for the storm to pass. The one inside you. I didn't want you to feel trapped or obligated. I wanted you to be free to choose. I'm choosing." I whispered, my voice choked with tears I hadn't realized I was crying. "I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you." A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. He leaned in, his movements unhurried, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I met him halfway. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, a question. I answered by pressing back, a confirmation. The kiss was not a flash of lightning, not a crash of thunder. It was the quiet, profound relief of a ship finding safe harbor after a long and perilous journey. It was gentle and deep and filled with all the unspoken words, all the yearning glances, all the pent-up emotion of the past weeks. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. He pulled back slightly, resting his forehead against mine. His other hand came up to cradle the other side of my face. We stood like that for a long time, just breathing each other in, our eyes closed. His hands were a warm, steady anchor in the swirling sea of my emotions. "So," he murmured, his breath warm against my lips. "The contract is almost fulfilled, yes," I whispered back, my heart aching at the thought. "Then I suppose," he said, a smile in his voice, "I'll have to offer you a new one. A permanent position, co-captain of this vessel. The duties are negotiable." I laughed, a real, happy laugh that felt like it came from a stranger. I opened my eyes. He was looking at me with so much love, so much tenderness, that it took my breath away. "I accept," I said, my voice firm and clear. And I kissed him again, a kiss that was not an ending, but a beginning. The beginning of a new map, a new journey, that we would navigate together. The storm was over, and the sea ahead was calm and bright and full of promise.